The ringing was the first sign, a sound like a phantom tuning fork struck against the edge of the universe, its impossibly high, thin note vibrating directly in the center of Alastair Finch's brain. It was a sound no one else could hear, a secret torment that had become the soundtrack to his final days. Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose time was billed in four-figure increments per minute, snapped his briefcase shut with a sound like a muffled gunshot in the cathedral-like silence of the penthouse. The click echoed off the 40-foot glass walls that framed a god's-eye view of the city, a glittering kingdom Alastair had built and now could no longer rule. "There is nothing more, Alastair," Thorne said, his voice stripped of the forced optimism he'd been peddling for months. It was flat, final. "We've exhausted every avenue, every specialist, every experimental treatment from Kyoto to Zurich. The degeneration is accelerating." Alastair's hand, resting on the cool leather of his motorized chair, trembled. A tremor he couldn't stop. He hated it, hated the weakness. "Name your price, Eris," Alastair rasped, his own voice a stranger's, thin and brittle. "Another 10 million, 20. Find a new avenue. Buy one." Dr. Thorne paused, his hand on the chrome handle of the door. For the first time, in their long and obscenely expensive association, he looked at Alastair, not as a client, but as a man. The look was worse than any diagnosis. It was pity. "This is the one thing your money can't buy," he said softly, and then he was gone, leaving Alastair alone with the ringing in his head in the sprawling, indifferent city below. The world had shrunk to the dimensions of his penthouse, a gilded cage suspended 1,000 feet above the grit and grime of ordinary life. His days were measured not in market closes and acquisition meetings, but in the slow, agonizing betrayal of his own body. The tremors had started in his left hand, a flutter he could once conceal by slipping it into his pocket. Now they racked his entire frame, a spastic dance he had no control over. His thoughts, once sharp enough to dissect a corporate balance sheet in seconds, now drifted like smoke, catching on forgotten memories, and then dissipating into a fog of confusion. He would find himself staring at the priceless Monet on his wall, a canvas of soft, impressionistic water lilies, and forget what he was looking at, or who he was. The name of the disease was as elegant as it was lethal: cerebroaxonal dystrophy, a 1 in 100 million genetic anomaly, his own unique, bespoke death sentence. He had thrown billions at it. He flew in entire research teams, housed them in luxury hotels, gave them unlimited funding to work around the clock. He bought cutting-edge biotech firms outright, hoping to brute force a cure into existence. But his neurons continued to wither, the delicate wiring of his consciousness fraying strand by strand. The ringing was his constant companion, a tinnitus that grew louder as the silence of his life deepened. His staff tiptoed around him, their faces a carefully constructed mask of professional sympathy that failed to hide their fear. His 2 children, long since estranged by his neglect and emotional cruelty, had made their obligatory visits. His son, Richard, had stood awkwardly by the window, talking about stock options, unable to bridge the chasm of years between them. His daughter Clara had simply cried, her tears a currency he didn't know how to value. He had dismissed them both with a wave of his trembling hand, the gesture costing him a mountain of effort. He was Alastair Finch. He had devoured competitors, bent markets to his will, and shaped the digital landscape of the 21st century. He had never known failure. Now, It was the only thing he had left. In his moments of terrifying clarity, when the fog lifted and the ringing subsided to a dull hum, he would look at his reflection in the dark glass of his panoramic window. He saw a ghost superimposed on a city of light, a frail, withered old man trapped in a monument to his own forgotten power. And he was terrified. Miles away, far below the gleaming towers and penthouses, in a part of the city the tourist maps conveniently ignored, the world was a different shape and texture. Here, the buildings huddled together for warmth, their brick facades scarred with graffiti and time. The air smelled of damp asphalt, frying onions, and the sweet, cloying scent of exhaust fumes. In a small apartment above a shuttered laundromat, 8-year-old Maya traced the lines on her grandmother's hand. The skin was like ancient parchment, soft and crisscrossed with a million tiny rivers of experience. Her grandmother, Elena, lay propped against a pile of mismatched pillows, her breathing a shallow, ragged whisper. "Tell me again, Nana," Maya whispered, her small voice a thread of light in the dim room. "Tell me about the sun petal." Elena's eyes, cloudy with age and illness, fluttered open. A faint smile touched her lips. "Ah, the Solari," she murmured, her voice thin as a dragonfly's wing. She always used the old name. "It is not a flower of the earth, Maha. It is a piece of the sun, caught in a petal. It only grows in one place, a hidden valley, where the moonlight is so bright it can ripen a peach." The story was as familiar to Maya as her own name. She had heard it 100 times. A bedtime story, a fairy tale, a family legend. Her grandmother's grandmother, a healer from the old country, had seen it once. The sun petal, she said, could mend what was broken. It could quiet a shaking hand, clear a clouded mind, and make the old feel young again. For months Maya had watched her Nana fade. It had started with a small tremor in her hand, a little shake when she tried to lift her teacup. Then she began to forget things. Names, recipes, where she'd put her glasses. Now she barely left her bed. The doctors at the community clinic had shaken their heads, used long, confusing words, and prescribed pills that did nothing but make her sleep. Maya's mother, Sophia, a woman whose strength was being worn thin by worry and double shifts at a downtown diner, said they had to be practical. She worked with herbs herself, selling remedies and poultices at a small market stall, but she knew their limits. Magic, she told Maya, couldn't pay the rent. One evening, while Sophia was at work, and Maya was mashing some soup for her grandmother, the old television in the corner flickered with a news report. A stern-faced anchorwoman was talking about the reclusive billionaire, Alistair Finch. A picture of the man flashed on the screen, cold, severe, with eyes that looked like chips of ice. The anchorwoman spoke of his mysterious, untreatable illness, listing the symptoms in a somber tone. A rapid neurological decline, marked by severe tremors, memory loss, and a persistent auditory hallucination, a high-frequency ringing sound. Maya froze, the spoon hovering over the bowl. Tremors, memory loss. The words were a perfect echo of her grandmother's decline. She looked from the cold face on the screen to the frail woman sleeping in the bed. It was the same shadow, the same thief, stealing away the people she loved. The report continued, mentioning the Finch Corporation's official statement, the global search for a cure, and then a staggering detail: a $50 million reward for any information leading to a viable treatment. The number hung in the air, so vast and unreal it felt like a number from a fairy tale. $50 million. It was more money than Maya could even imagine. It could buy 1,000 apartments like theirs, 1,000,000 bowls of soup. It could buy new lungs for her grandmother, a new mind. It could buy a lifetime of rest for her tired mother. But more than the money, it was the connection, the shared enemy. The same monster was attacking the richest man in the city and her poor, beloved Nana. Suddenly, the old story, the family legend, felt different. It wasn't just a fairy tale anymore. It was a map. The sun petal wasn't magic. It was medicine. And Maya knew, with the fierce, unshakable certainty of an 8-year-old with a desperate plan, that she had to find it. That night, after her mother came home, smelling of grease and bleach, and fell into an exhausted sleep, Maya slipped out of bed. She crept to the old wooden chest at the foot of her grandmother's bed. Inside, beneath neatly folded linens that smelled of lavender and thyme, was Elena's journal. It wasn't a diary of words, but of pictures. Elena had been an artist in her youth. The pages were filled with delicate, detailed sketches of plants and flowers, their names written in her elegant, looping script. Maya carefully turned the brittle pages, her heart thumping against her ribs. She found sketches of chamomile for calming teas, of willow bark for fevers, of aloe for burns. And then she saw it, a single page, more worn than the others. The drawing was of a flower with 7 petals, each one shaped like a teardrop. They radiated from a center that the drawing depicted with flecks of gold ink, making it seem as if it were glowing. The petals themselves were sketched in pale yellow, but the notes in the margin, written in her grandmother's fading handwriting, described a color that didn't exist in a crayon box. "Color of dawn," one note read. "Glows in the dark, smells like honey and rain." At the bottom of the page was a small hand-drawn map. It was less a map and more a series of landmarks. A broken bridge, a trio of twisted oak trees she called the Three Sisters, a creek that whispered, and finally, a narrow passage between 2 large, moss-covered boulders that led into a small, bowl-shaped valley. The starting point was the old aqueduct at the edge of the city, a place Maya was forbidden to go. In a small pouch tied with a leather cord, she packed her treasures: a half-eaten chocolate bar, a small bottle of water, her grandmother's little drawing of the sun petal, and a compass she'd gotten from a cereal box. She tucked the journal carefully back into the chest. She leaned over her grandmother, kissing the soft, wrinkled cheek. "I'll be back soon, Nana," she whispered. "I'll bring you the sunshine." With one last look at her sleeping mother, Maya slipped out of the apartment and into the sleeping city, a tiny knight on a quest of impossible proportions. Alistair woke up to the ringing. It was louder this morning, a piercing shriek that made him want to claw at his own ears. He tried to call for his nurse, but the word got stuck in his throat, a garbled mess of sound. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He was a prisoner in his own skull. He squeezed his eyes shut, and a memory, vivid and unwelcome, ambushed him. He was a boy, no older than Maya, standing in a field of wildflowers. His father, a stern, hard man who smelled of steel and ambition, was telling him to stop dawdling. "There's no profit in picking weeds, Alistair. Time is money." He had crushed the small yellow flower in his fist and hurried to catch up. The memory faded, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. What had the flower been? A buttercup? A dandelion? He couldn't remember. He had spent a lifetime learning to assign a monetary value to everything, and now, in the end, He couldn't recall the name of a simple flower. His nurse, a kind, efficient woman named Evelyn, bustled in. She checked his vitals, her touch gentle but professional. He wanted to tell her about the flower, to ask her its name, but the words wouldn't form. He could only watch, trapped behind his failing eyes, as she adjusted his pillows and checked the IV drip that fed him a cocktail of useless chemicals. He was no longer a man. He was a collection of symptoms, a data set on a chart, a problem with no solution. His empire, the vast, intricate machine he had built, was running without him. His board of directors, men he had personally chosen for their ruthless loyalty, now spoke of him in the past tense. They sent him daily reports, glossy brochures of continued success, but he knew they were just waiting for him to die. Vultures in tailored suits. He closed his eyes again, willing the fog to take him, to drown out the ringing and the memories and the crushing weight of his useless, gilded life. Maya's journey began in the pre-dawn gray. The city was a different beast when it was asleep. The usual roar of traffic was a distant hum, and the streets were populated by shadows and ghosts. Garbage trucks groaned like prehistoric monsters, their flashing lights painting the buildings in brief, lurid colors. She knew these streets, but they felt alien now, charged with the nervous energy of her secret mission. She kept to the alleyways, her small sneakers making soft, furtive sounds on the pavement. She passed the bakery, the warm smell of rising bread making her stomach ache with a pang of hunger she ignored. She passed the park, where the swings hung still and silent, like skeletons. Her destination was the edge of town, where the city frayed and gave way to forgotten industrial parks, and then, finally, to the wild, untamed woods that bordered the suburbs. The aqueduct was a colossal ruin, a concrete spine arching over a dried-up riverbed. It was covered in graffiti, a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of names and symbols. It looked like a sleeping giant, and Maya felt a tremor of fear as she walked beneath its massive legs. This was the starting point on her Nana's map. She pulled out the drawing, her small hands trembling slightly in the cool morning air. The first landmark was the broken bridge. She followed the dry riverbed, a dusty trench filled with discarded tires and shopping carts. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The light made the world seem less frightening, more hopeful. She found the bridge an hour later. It was an old wooden structure, half of which had collapsed into the gully below. It looked impassable. Her heart sank. This was the first test, and she had already failed. She sat on the bank, tears welling in her eyes. She thought of her Nana's weak smile, of her mother's tired face. She couldn't give up. She looked again. The collapsed section was a mess of splintered wood, but on the far side, one of the thick support beams was still intact, stretching from the bank to the middle pier. It was wide enough to walk on, if you were careful and brave. Taking a deep breath, Maya wiped her eyes. She imagined she was a tightrope walker in the circus. She put one foot in front of the other, her arms outstretched for balance, her eyes fixed on the other side. The gully below seemed to yawn, waiting for her to fall. But she didn't. She reached the middle pier, her legs shaking, and then scrambled across the remaining, more stable part of the bridge. She had done it. A surge of pride and relief washed over her. She was a hero, an adventurer. Back in the sterile silence of the penthouse, Alistair's legal team was having a meeting. They sat around his massive obsidian table, their faces grim. His chief counsel, a shark named Marcus Adler, was outlining the contingency plan. The Finch Protocol, they called it. A series of trusts and holding companies designed to protect the empire from a succession crisis. They talked about him as if he weren't there, his body in the motorized chair at the head of the table a mere formality. "The board is in agreement," Marcus said, his voice smooth and confident. "Richard will assume the role of interim CEO. Clara will have her trust fully funded, on the condition she waives any claim to a board seat." Alistair listened, the words floating in the fog of his mind. Richard, his son. A boy who had his father's ambition, but none of his vision. He would run the company into the ground within 5 years. And Clara, his sensitive, artistic daughter, whom he had always derided for her weakness. He had tried to buy her love with money, and now he was buying her silence with it. A wave of something hot and bitter rose in his throat. It wasn't just fear or regret. It was rage. A sudden white-hot fury at his own impotence. With a titanic effort of will, he focused all his remaining energy. He forced the neurons to fire, the synapses to connect. He pushed the word from his brain to his lips. "No," he croaked. The lawyer stopped, turning to him in surprise. The sound was barely a whisper, but it was a word, a command. Marcus Adler leaned forward, a predatory smile touching his lips. "Alistair, did you want to say something?" Alistair stared at him, his eyes burning. He tried to speak again, to tell them they were all fired, to dismantle the protocol, to undo the mess he had made of his life and his family. But the connection was gone. The fog rolled back in, thick and suffocating. The single word had cost him everything. He slumped back in his chair, the tremor in his hand returning with a vengeance. The lawyers exchanged glances, a silent consensus passing between them. The old man was gone. They went back to their papers, their voices once again a low, conspiratorial murmur. Alistair Finch was already a ghost at his own funeral. Maya followed the whispering creek. Her Nana's map had been right. The water made a soft, shushing sound as it flowed over the smooth stones. The woods were deep and green, a stark contrast to the concrete and brick of her neighborhood. Sunlight filtered through the canopy of leaves, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was beautiful, but also a little scary. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a lurking animal. Every snap of a twig made her jump. To keep her courage up, she sang the songs her Nana had taught her, little Spanish lullabies about stars and moons and brave little birds. Her sneakers were soaked, and her legs were scratched from pushing through thorny bushes, but she kept going. She ate half of her chocolate bar, saving the rest for the journey back. The sweetness gave her a burst of energy. She thought about what she would do with the reward money. First, she would get the best doctors for Nana. Then, she would buy a small house with a garden, so her mother wouldn't have to work at the diner anymore. A garden where they could grow their own herbs, and maybe, if they were careful, their own sun petals. The thought made her smile. Late in the afternoon, she found them, the 3 sisters. 3 ancient oak trees, their trunks gnarled and twisted together as if they were holding hands. They looked exactly like the drawing in the journal. Excitement bubbled in her chest. She was close. She knew it. The map showed that the entrance to the valley was near the oaks, a narrow passage between 2 mossy boulders. She searched for what felt like hours, her hope beginning to wane as the sun began to dip towards the horizon. The woods were getting darker, the shadows longer and more menacing. What if she couldn't find it? What if she had to spend the night out here, alone? She was about to give up and huddle at the base of the Three Sisters when she saw it. Tucked behind a thick curtain of ivy, almost completely hidden, were two massive, rounded boulders, covered in a thick, velvety carpet of green moss. It was the gate. Her heart leaped. With trembling hands, she pushed aside the ivy and squeezed through the narrow gap. The world on the other side was breathtaking. It was a small, perfectly round valley, no bigger than a city park, sunk deep into the earth. A gentle waterfall cascaded down one side, feeding a crystal-clear pool. The air was still and warm, filled with the scent of damp earth and unknown blossoms. And the light was extraordinary. The last rays of the setting sun seemed to be trapped here, amplified, making the entire valley glow with a soft, golden luminescence. In the very center of the valley, next to the pool, was a small patch of flowers. They were unlike anything Maya had ever seen. They had 7 petals, shaped like tears, and they pulsed with a gentle, internal light. Their color was the pale, luminous gold of the rising sun. She approached them with a sense of awe, her footsteps silent on the soft grass. They smelled of honey and rain, just as the journal had said. The sun petals, they were real. Tears of relief and joy streamed down Maya's face. She had found them. She carefully picked one, its stem warm to the touch. The flower seemed to brighten in her hand, its soft glow illuminating her face. She held a piece of the sun. She had a cure for her Nana, a cure for the cold, sad man on the television. She had hope, cupped in the palm of her small, dirty hand. The journey back was a blur. Fueled by adrenaline and the glowing flower she clutched in her hand, Maya retraced her steps. The darkness of the woods no longer seemed frightening. The sun petal in her pocket was a tiny lantern, its warmth and light a constant reassurance. She navigated by the sound of the whispering creek and the memory of the landmarks. She crossed the broken bridge under the light of a full moon, her step sure and steady this time. She reached the edge of the city as the first hint of dawn was breaking. The city was waking up now, its sleepy rumble growing into a roar. The sight of the tall buildings in the distance, especially the tallest of them all, Finch Tower, filled her with a new kind of determination. Her quest wasn't over. The hardest part was yet to come. She had to get inside that fortress of glass and steel. She had to get past the guards and the secretaries and deliver her miracle. She walked the rest of the way, a small solitary figure, moving against the tide of morning commuters. She clutched the sun petal, now wrapped carefully in a large leaf to protect it. It still pulsed with a faint warmth. When she finally stood at the base of Finch Tower, she had to crane her neck back to see the top. It disappeared into the clouds, a modern-day Tower of Babel. The lobby was a vast, cold space of marble and steel. Men and women in sharp suits moved with brisk, silent efficiency. A formidable security guard with a chest like a barrel and a face like stone stood by the entrance. Maya took a deep breath, walked up to him, and said, in the clearest, bravest voice she could muster, "Excuse me, sir. I'm here to see Mr. Finch. I have his medicine." The guard looked down at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. He saw a scruffy little girl with tangled hair, scratched legs, and dirt under her fingernails. "Beat it, kid," he grunted, not unkindly. This ain't a playground. Maya stood her ground. It's important, she insisted. He's sick. I can help him. Yeah, you and 1,000 other cranks, the guard said, his patience wearing thin. I've had faith healers, psychics, and a guy with a magic crystal trying to get in here all week. Now go on, get out of here, before I have to call someone. He turned his attention back to the flow of important people. Maya was invisible again. She tried the reception desk, a long, intimidating slab of black marble. The woman behind it gave her a practiced, dismissive smile and told her to write a letter. Maya tried to explain, her voice getting lost in the cavernous space. No one listened. She was a stray dog in a palace, a speck of dust in a pristine machine. Defeated, she slumped onto a hard bench near the entrance. The city buzzed around her, indifferent and overwhelming. She looked at the leaf-wrapped treasure in her lap. It had been so easy to believe in magic in the hidden valley. Here, in the heart of Alistair Finch's world, it just felt like a wilted flower. For 2 days, Maya laid siege to Finch Tower. She became a tiny, persistent ghost haunting the lobby. She learned the guards' shift changes. She learned that the morning rush was too chaotic, but that the mid-afternoon lull offered a better chance of being noticed, or at least a lesser chance of being yelled at. She spent her last few coins on a hot dog from a street vendor, eating it slowly to make it last. She was tired, hungry, and homesick. At night, she huddled in the alcove of a nearby building, the wrapped sun petal clutched to her chest for warmth. She thought of her mother, who must be frantic with worry. She thought of her Nana, who was waiting for her. The thought kept the tears at bay and fueled her resolve. On the 3rd day, a young woman with a mess of red hair and a press pass hanging around her neck noticed her. Her name was Sarah, a junior reporter for an online news blog, hungry for a story that would get her noticed. She had seen Maya the day before, a flash of color and misery in the gray corporate landscape. She sat down on the bench next to her. "You're a long way from school," Sarah said gently. Maya just shook her head, clutching her leafy package. Sarah tried again, waiting for someone. "I have to see Mr. Finch," Maya said, her voice small. "Why? I have something for him, to make him better." Sarah's journalistic instincts tingled. This was probably nothing. Another sad, deluded soul drawn to the gravitational pull of a billionaire's tragedy. But there was something in the girl's eyes, a fierce, desperate sincerity. "What do you have?" she asked. Hesitantly, Maya unwrapped the leaf. The flower inside had faded slightly, but it still held a faint, otherworldly glow. It looked like a prop from a fantasy movie. "It's a sun petal," Maya whispered. "It can cure him. And my Nana." Sarah stared at the flower, then at the girl. She pulled out her phone and, on a whim, started recording, asking Maya to tell her the whole story. Maya, desperate for someone to finally listen, told her everything. The sick grandmother, the news report, the journal, the broken bridge, the 3 Oaks, the hidden valley. Sarah listened, captivated. It was a crazy, unbelievable story, a fairy tale. But, in the telling, it felt real. When Maya finished, Sarah stopped recording. She had a choice. She could write this up as a quirky, human interest piece, a tale of a little girl's hope in the shadow of corporate power. Or she could do something else. She looked at Maya's earnest, tired face, and then up at the impossibly tall tower. "Wait here," she said. Up on the 95th floor, Evelyn, the nurse, was changing Alistair's IV bag. He had slipped into a state of semi-consciousness, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. The ringing in his head had become a deafening roar, a solid wall of sound that blocked out everything else. He was drifting, untethered, in a gray, featureless void. In the adjacent office, Alastair's personal assistant, a calm, middle-aged man named George, was fielding calls. He was the gatekeeper, the last line of defense between Alastair and the world. For weeks, his job had been to politely decline offers from every charlatan and miracle worker on the planet. His phone buzzed. It was a contact from the security desk downstairs. "George, sorry to bother you. There's a reporter down here, Sarah Jenkins from City Beat. She's got some kid with her. They're causing a bit of a scene, refusing to leave. The girl has some crazy story about a magic flower." George sighed. "Get rid of them, Frank, gently, if possible." "We tried. The reporter is threatening to publish a story about Finch Corp. Turning away a dying man's last hope, complete with a picture of a crying little girl. It's not a good look." George pinched the bridge of his nose. The last thing they needed was a PR nightmare. He was about to tell Frank to call the police and have them trespassed when his other line rang. It was Dr. Thorne. "George," the doctor said, his voice urgent. "I'm looking at his latest scans. The decay it's catastrophic. The brain stem is being affected. At this rate, he won't last the night. I'm coming over, but it's just to be there at the end." George hung up the phone, a cold dread washing over him. He had worked for Alastair for 30 years. He had seen him as a titan, a force of nature. To see him reduced to this, to hear the finality in the doctor's voice, it was unbearable. He looked through the glass wall at the frail figure in the chair. Won't last the night. What did they have to lose? A little bad press? A story about a magic flower? It seemed so absurd, so trivial, in the face of the stark reality of death. "Frank," he said into the phone, "send the girl up, and the reporter. Send them up." The elevator ride was like an ascent into heaven. Maya's ears popped as they shot upwards, the city shrinking below them. Sarah held her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. The doors opened onto a silent, plushly carpeted reception area. A man with a kind, worried face was waiting for them. It was George. He led them into the main room, a space so large it could have contained Maya's entire apartment building. The view was dizzying. And there, in the center of it all, was the man from the television, Alastair Finch. He looked smaller in person, frailer, a crumpled puppet in his high-tech chair. His eyes were closed. A nurse was checking a machine that beeped softly. Dr. Thorne was there, too, standing by the window, his arms crossed. He looked at Maya and Sarah with unconcealed skepticism. "George, what is this?" he demanded. "The last thing he needs is a circus." "They have a story," George said quietly. "I think he would want to hear it." Sarah nudged Maya forward. All her practiced bravery deserted her. She was just a little girl, terrified and out of her depth. She looked at the sick man, and he didn't look like a monster or a billionaire. He just looked like her Nana, lost and far away. She took a deep breath and walked towards him. She held out the flower. "I brought you this, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice trembling. "It's a sun petal from a hidden valley. It's for you, and for my Nana. She's sick, too." Dr. Thorne stepped forward, about to intervene, but George put a hand on his arm. "Let her," he whispered. Alastair's eyelids fluttered. He didn't open them, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. Deep inside the roaring void, a tiny sound had pierced through. a child's voice. Maya remembered what her mother did with herbs. She asked the nurse for a glass of warm water. With practiced movements, she crushed 2 of the 7 petals into the water. The water instantly took on a soft golden hue and gave off a faint scent of honey and rain. The doctor watched, his face a mask of disbelief. "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly be considering this." "What do we have to lose, Aris?" George said, his voice heavy with grief. "He's leaving us. What if, by some 1 in a billion chance, this is—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Maya held the glass. The nurse, Evelyn, looked at George, who nodded. Evelyn gently tilted Alistair's head back and helped him sip the warm, golden water. He swallowed, a purely reflexive action. For a moment, nothing happened. Dr. Thorne scoffed, turning away in disgust. The machine continued its steady, monotonous beeping. And then something changed. The violent tremor in Alistair's hand subsided. It didn't stop completely, but the spastic jerking softened into a gentle flutter. A sigh, deep and long, escaped his lips. The lines of pain on his face seemed to smooth out, and the beeping of the heart monitor, which had been erratic, settled into a slower, more regular rhythm. Everyone in the room stared, frozen. Sarah lifted her phone, her reporter's instincts battling with a sense of profound, inexplicable awe. And then the most impossible thing of all happened. The high-pitched ringing in Alistair's head, the constant, torturous shriek that had been his companion for a year, faded. It receded like a departing train, growing fainter and fainter until it was replaced by something he hadn't experienced in what felt like a lifetime. Silence. A deep, profound, and blessedly peaceful silence. His eyes opened. They were no longer cloudy with fog and pain. They were clear. He looked around the room, his gaze passing over the doctor, the nurse, George, the reporter. Finally, his eyes settled on the small girl standing before him, clutching a strange, glowing flower. The first word he spoke was not about his company, or his money, or his pain. It was a question, whispered in a voice full of wonder. "Who," he asked, his voice cracking from disuse, "are you?" The days that followed were a strange dream. Alistair Finch did not experience a miraculous, instantaneous recovery. The sun petal was not a magic wand, but it was a key. It had unlocked his body's own stalled healing process. It halted the aggressive degeneration of his neurons and seemed to be slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding the damaged pathways. Dr. Thorne was beside himself. He analyzed the flower, running every test imaginable. Its cellular structure was unlike anything he had ever seen. It contained a unique neuroregenerative compound that was, from a biochemical standpoint, impossible. He couldn't explain it, and it drove his scientific mind to distraction. But he could not deny the results. Alistair was getting better. His motor control was slowly returning. The tremors became less frequent, less violent. The fog in his mind began to lift, like a morning mist burning off in the sun. He could hold a conversation, read a book, remember the names of his children. With his returning clarity came a profound and humbling wave of shame. He remembered everything, every cruel word, every broken promise, every person he had stepped on in his relentless climb to the top. He had been a king on a mountain of gold, and he had been dying of thirst. The person he wanted to talk to most was Maya. She and her mother, Sophia, were now staying in a luxury suite in the tower, a situation Sophia found deeply unsettling. Sophia was a proud, practical woman. She was overjoyed at the prospect of helping her own mother, but she was deeply suspicious of Alistair Finch and his world of unimaginable wealth. Alistair insisted on meeting her. He wanted to thank her. He wanted to apologize, though he wasn't sure for what. For the state of the world that had created such a chasm between his penthouse and her apartment, perhaps. He found Maya in the suite's sprawling living room, teaching her mother how to use the complicated coffee machine. He was in a wheelchair now, not the motorized throne, but a simple one he could push himself. "Maya," he said, his voice still weak but clear. She turned, her face breaking into a wide, bright smile that lit up the entire room. It was a smile of pure, uncomplicated goodness. It struck Alistair with the force of a physical blow. When was the last time someone had looked at him like that? "Mr. Finch, you're walking," she said, confusing the wheelchair with a stroll in the park. He chuckled, a rusty, unfamiliar sound. "Not quite, but I'm working on it. Thanks to you." Sophia stepped forward, her arms crossed, her expression wary. "We are glad we could help, Mr. Finch. My daughter, she is a very determined girl." "She is a force of nature," Alistair agreed. "I want to help your mother. I've already dispatched a medical team to your home. They will bring her here, to the best wing of the best hospital in the city. She will have whatever she needs." Sophia's expression softened slightly, but the suspicion remained. "We don't want your charity." "It's not charity," Alistair said, his gaze steady and sincere. "It's a debt, one I can never truly repay. And there is the matter of the $50 million reward. The number, so fantastical when Maya had first heard it, now landed in the quiet room with a thud. Sophia's eyes widened. She had known about the reward, of course, but had dismissed it as something that didn't apply to people like them. That is not necessary," she stammered. "It is a contract," Alistair said simply, "and I always honor my contracts. The money will be placed in a trust for Maya, managed by the most honest people I know, which, I admit, is a very short list, but George is on it." He looked at Maya, who was staring at him, her head tilted. She didn't understand trusts or contracts. She understood her Nana was going to get help. She understood this sad, lonely man was getting better. "Can I ask you a question?" she said. "Anything," Alistair replied. "Why were you so sad?" The question was so direct, so simple, yet it pierced through decades of Alistair's carefully constructed defenses. He had been called ruthless, a genius, a monster, but no one had ever asked him if he was sad. He thought for a long moment. "Because," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "I forgot the names of the flowers." The transformation of Alistair Finch began not with a grand gesture, but with a small one. He had Elena, Maya's grandmother, moved into a private hospital suite that looked more like a five-star hotel. He sat by her bedside as she was given a dose of the sun petal infusion. He watched as the same quiet miracle he had experienced unfolded again. The tremors in her hands stilled. A light of recognition returned to her clouded eyes. A few days later, she was sitting up in bed, telling him stories of the old country, of the legends of the Solari. She was a woman of deep, simple wisdom, and Alistair found himself listening, truly listening, for the first time in his life. He also had a long, difficult conversation with his children. He didn't ask for their forgiveness. He knew he hadn't earned it. He simply told them the truth. He told them about his fear, his regrets, and how a little girl, with a flower, had saved him from himself. Richard was skeptical, assuming it was a ploy, a new form of manipulation. But Clara, his daughter, saw the change in his eyes. The cold, calculating light was gone, replaced by a weary, fragile humanity. It was a start. His next act was to visit Maya's neighborhood. He had George drive him, not in his Rolls-Royce, but in a simple, nondescript sedan. As they drove away from the gleaming steel and glass of the financial district, the city transformed. The buildings became smaller, the streets more crowded, the colors more vibrant and chaotic. He saw the shuttered laundromat, the cracked pavement, the kids playing soccer in the street with a worn-out ball. This was the world that had produced Maya, a world of struggle and resilience, of community and hardship. He saw a small, neglected park, its benches broken, its grass patchy and full of weeds. He saw the community clinic, a small, unassuming building with a line of people waiting outside. He had lived in the same city as these people his entire life, yet he had never truly seen them. They were an abstraction on a balance sheet, a demographic to be marketed to, a labor force to be managed. They were not real. Now they were. He thought of the billions he had spent on an extra wing for a modern art museum, a vanity project to cement his legacy. What could that money have done here? He returned to his office and summoned Marcus Adler and the legal team. They arrived, expecting to finalize the Finch Protocol and grease the wheels of the succession. They found a different man waiting for them. "The Finch Protocol is canceled," Alistair announced, his voice firm. "We are liquidating the museum fund. We're dissolving 3 of the offshore holding companies. And we are starting a new foundation, the Sun Paddle Foundation." The lawyers stared at him, dumbfounded. Marcus Adler found his voice first. "Alistair, are you well? Perhaps we should consult Dr. Thorne." "I have never been more well in my life," Alistair said, a faint smile on his lips. "The Foundation's first project will be the complete renovation of the park and community clinic in the East End. After that, we're going to build the best-funded, most innovative school in the state, right in the middle of that neighborhood. And tuition will be free." He was dismantling his own legacy, piece by piece, and building a new one. A legacy not of power or wealth, but of hope. Years passed. The Sun Paddle Foundation, guided by George, Sophia, and a surprisingly savvy Clara, transformed not just Maya's neighborhood, but dozens like it across the country. The original Sun Paddle, which scientists discovered could not be artificially replicated and would only grow in its hidden valley, was protected. A small sustainable harvest was collected each year, its precious essence used not to prolong the lives of the wealthy, but to treat those with similar degenerative diseases in the Foundation's clinics, free of charge. Alistair Finch never fully recovered the physical strength of his youth. He walked with a cane, and his hands still had a slight tremor when he was tired. But his mind was sharp, and his heart, which he had long thought atrophied, was full. He had stepped down as CEO of his company, handing the reins to a competent successor he had mentored, with Clara taking an active role on the board to oversee its new ethical and philanthropic directives. His relationship with his children was not perfect, but it was real. It was a slow, awkward process of rebuilding, but it was filled with genuine love and forgiveness. His greatest joy, however, was his friendship with Maya. He had watched her grow from a determined little girl into a brilliant, compassionate young woman. The trust fund had given her opportunities, but her spirit was entirely her own. She was at the top of her class, at the school his foundation had built, planning to become a doctor who worked with plants, a scientist who believed in stories. On his 82nd birthday, Alistair didn't celebrate with a lavish party in his penthouse. The party was in the Elena Garcia Community Garden, the once neglected park, now a lush, vibrant oasis of flowers and vegetable patches. His children were there, with their own families. His grandchildren played on the swings he had paid for, their laughter echoing in the evening air. Elena, her hair now white as snow, but her eyes bright and full of life, sat beside him, patting his hand. Sophia was serving food she had cooked herself, her face relaxed and happy. And Maya, now a poised 17-year-old, stood to give a toast. She spoke of courage, and of how the most powerful things in the world are not money or buildings, but hope and kindness. She spoke of how a single act of love can ripple outwards, touching countless lives. Later, as the sun set, painting the sky in the colors of a sun petal, Alistair sat with Maya on a bench, watching the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. "Are you still sad, Mr. Finch?" she asked, her voice soft. He looked at the scene around him, the families, the laughter, the life blooming in this small corner of the world he had once ignored. He thought of the ringing that was now just a distant memory, and the silence that had been filled with so much love. "No, Maya," he said, his own voice thick with unshed tears of gratitude. "I'm not sad anymore." He finally remembered the name of the flower he had crushed as a boy. It was a dandelion, a common weed. But even weeds, he now knew, could make a wish come true. And in the end, it wasn't the billionaire who saved himself with his fortune. It was a little girl, armed with nothing but a fairy tale and a flower, who had shown him the way home. She had brought him the sun. This story is a reminder that the greatest value lies not in what we accumulate for ourselves, but in what we give to others. It's a testament to the idea that compassion is the most powerful currency, and that hope can be found in the most unexpected of places. If this story touched your heart, consider sharing it with someone who might need a little bit of sunshine today. What small act of kindness can you perform that might ripple outwards and change a world? The power to heal, to connect, and to redeem is within all of us, often waiting just behind a wall of our own making, ready to be unlocked by the simplest of keys.